to the Red Leaf Card, your home for Canadian soccer news and views. My name is Jacob, and today we're going to be talking about the Canada's men's national friendly match against Guatemala and the 2026 Canadian Championship draw. So, as the final score of Canada versus Guatemala's friendly match comes to a final of 1-0. And a lot of Canadian fans out there must be pleased that Canada defeating Guatemala because of, as known, previous match for Canada versus Guatemala didn't go really well for Canada's side in the CONCACAF Gold Cup. So it's always this whole thing, what does this win actually give? Possibly absolutely nothing at this point, but a good win for giving some of the young players a chance to actually play in this friendly matchup. As known, I'm not talking about some young players in the Canadian men's national team. I'm talking about Canadian Premier League players that had their opportunity to actually play this friendly matchup against Guatemala. And who else that was called up for the Canadian men's national team friendly? Shola Jimu for Inter Toronto FC, Noah Batney for Atletico Ottawa, Toye Combra for Halifax Wanderers. And a lot of fans kind of reacted to this as a good call for some of these Canadian Premier League players getting called up for the Canadian national team. A good sign, and also maybe a possibility maybe going to the FIFA World Cup for 2026. Even Shola Jimu being the starter in that matchup, a kind of a huge role for Shola Jimu since how he played for the under team and also for the Canadian Premier League players showing their best to show their talent in the Canadian national team. As known for their next upcoming matches for the Canadian men's national team, there will be playing against Uzbekistan for a friendly for the upcoming 2026 World Cup. And we'll be playing in Edmonton. So lot to see for this upcoming friendly match and seeing how that matchup will go, because it might be a roster that they would have to bring in their big name players for the Canadian national team for their upcoming FIFA World Cup, probably with Alonso Davis, Jonathan David, and many other players to come. As known, the same day that Canada versus Guatemala were playing, the draw for the 2026 Canadian Championship has already been done, and a lot of people seeing this 2026 Canadian Championship draw was kind of surprised of what we're going to see for the first round of the Canadian Championship. So as known, we're going to see Pacific FC versus Calgary FC. Club de Foot Montreal will be versing League One Alberta team Calgary Blizzard SC. Vancouver FC will be versing the League One BC team, Langley United. Forge FC will be versing Halifax Wanderers. Inter Toronto FC will be versing League One Quebec team, CS Saint Laurent. Toronto FC will be versing Atletico Ottawa. And FC Supra du Quebec will be versing the Woodbridge Strikers. And one of these matches, I think a lot of people might have an eye on, is maybe looking at Forge FC versus Halifax Wanderers. Might be a good matchup to see an upset there. To move on to see who will verse Inter Toronto FC or maybe CS Saint Laurent. Might be an upset also alongside with that with Inter Toronto FC versus CS Saint Laurent. But when I see right now this 2026 year, a lot of back and forth with CS Saint Laurent has made a lot of changes in the team. Probably we might not see CS Saint Laurent being that competitive from previous seasons due to FC Supra de Quebec signing their head coach, even some of their players. So it might be on Inter Toronto FC side that could move on to the quarterfinals. And you look at Toronto FC versus Atletico Ottawa, that's also going to be a big one. I think a lot of Atletico Ottawa fans are mixed about this one because they want a better advantage in the first round. But they got Toronto FC. And Toronto FC, looking at how their roster signings are doing, kind of really competitive, seeing how they're doing in the offseason. But as known, Atletico Ottawa, you look at how now they're going to be versing two MLS teams early season, one in the CONCACAF Champions Cup versus Nashville SC. But again, that additional, if Atletico Ottawa wins, they'll be versing Inter Miami. And seeing Atletico Ottawa, could maybe make an upset. Again, Toronto FC has not been this team that has been defeated by the Canadian Premier League team's side in aggregate score or in a knockout stage at any of the Canadian Championship. I look at Toronto FC, they might be the advantage of Atletico Ottawa. If Atletico Ottawa does really well in signing players, you might see some good things to happen. If you look at FC Supra de Quebec, they're going to be versing debut team Woodbridge Strikers SC. And looking at it, it could be along favor with FC Supra. They have David Chouanier alongside with it, Sean Rea, and many other players. Also Sissoko, who was a former Atletico Ottawa player. I would say Supra is going to be moving on to the next round, but if you look at, for example, Vancouver FC versus Langley United, I always look at saying, does Vancouver FC might actually go semifinals or possibly do it again to go to the finals? And I would have to say no. I would say that they would be the team that could go to the quarterfinals, but they're going to be versing Langley United. Both teams playing at home base. So both teams, like, the fans are going to be like, who should we be actually cheering on. Why not both? I like this derby, to be honest. The Langley Derby of the Canadian Championship. So, might be an upset for Langley United to actually defeat Vancouver FC. Trying to be this TSS Rovers team to actually beat a Canadian Premier League team. But we'll see how that goes in the month of May. And Club de Foot Montreal versus Calgary Blizzard SC. I think we all know which side is going to go to the next round. And that will be Club de Foot Montreal. Club de Foot Montreal, in my opinion, has always been this competitive side in the Canadian Championship. And Calgary Blizzard going so far to go to Montreal and play on their soil. I think Calgary Blizzard is going to have that feeling that it's going to be really hard. But I think looking at Calgary Blizzard is going to be this moment that you had Calgary FC versus the Edmonton Scottish moment that they get blown out and Club de Foot Montreal just moves to the next round. So I think Club de Foot Montreal still wins this, but I still think that they might go to the semifinals. Pacific FC versus Calgary FC. I think this one also will be a competitive match. And I know the winner is going to be against the Whitecaps to this one. But it's always this one that which side do you want, that which Canadian Premier League team do you want to verse the Vancouver Whitecaps? You always have Calgary FC and Pacific FC. I always look at it, both teams actually might win this match. It could be a draw and could move to penalty kicks. But what's my predictions? I would have to decide that. I think first rounders, I think looking at Pacific FC versus Calgary FC, I think Calgary FC, no question, they're going to move to the next round to verse Vancouver Whitecaps. In the Club de Foot Montreal versus Calgary Blizzard FC, Montreal moves to the quarterfinals. And Vancouver FC versus Langley United, I would have to put Vancouver FC, and they'll be versing Club de Foot Montreal. I would have to say match for Forge FC versus Halifax Wanderers. I think we're going to see an upset. Halifax Wanderers defeats Forge FC. Inter Toronto FC versus CS Saint Laurent. I'm going to say Inter Toronto FC will be versing Halifax Wanderers. Toronto FC versus Atletico Ottawa. I'm going to say Toronto FC will move to the quarterfinals. And FC Supra du Quebec versus Woodbridge Strikers. So I'm going to say FC Supra is going to be versing Toronto FC in the quarterfinals. And I think those are my picks that will move on to the quarterfinals of the 2026 Canadian Championship that will be coming up in May. And that's full time of the Red Leaf card. You could follow us on X, Spotify, and YouTube. I'm your host, Jacob, subbing out.